Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Advanced Commercial Awareness webinar, which I'll be hosting. My name is Husnara. Before I tell you a bit about myself, I just wanted to mention a couple of things about Barbary, since they very kindly offered to collaborate with us on this program. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Barbary, they're a legal education provider specializing in getting candidates through the US bar examinations. This includes, that's what they've been known for very much in the past, but as many of you will be aware of, the solicitor's qualifying exam finally got the green light by the Legal Services Board. And so Barbary have already announced that they are now going to be offering SQE prep courses. They offer a range of flexible options already available, and you can start enrolling for those should you wish to, for part one of the exams. Those of you who aren't familiar, the SQE is split into parts 1 and 2. And you can find that in the resource link, I believe, on their website. If you have any questions about Barbary, then put those in the chat and I'll see if I can answer some of them. I'm certain I can answer a couple of SQE related questions, but that's the sales pitch over with regard to Barbary. Now let me move on to my first slide. So let me tell you a little bit about myself and about Cheeky Little Careers. So I trained and qualified with Linklaters, and as I approached 3 years post-qualified, I decided to follow my sort of previous passion, which was journalism and all things current affairs related, and then change careers again to legal recruitment before finally setting up my own consultancy. And the areas I focus on really are career coaching and business skills training, which commercial awareness falls under. And more recently, I launched Cheeky Little Careers in collaboration with my brother, Sanu, who is a banker at SocGen. So the website was literally launched in June 2020. And there you can find tons of free careers advice, practical tips, and also a useful section that other websites don't have, which is a devoted entirely to business skills. We're still populating the website, so some areas do look like they've got more content than others, so bear with us. And then you'll also find there's lots of content on there that I hope will inspire some of you to pursue your dreams of entering the profession at some stage in the future. Anyway, enough about me. What this session is really about is a phrase that ignites fear in so many students and aspiring solicitors and barristers, and that is, of course, commercial awareness. Let me be straight with you, okay? Commercial awareness is not something you should be fearful of. It's something you should be interested in, okay? And it's certainly not a skill that you will develop overnight, okay? It's a skill, and it really is a business skill, that you will continue to develop throughout your professional career, whether you stick with law or not. And in a nutshell, it's really understanding the economic and commercial backdrop of activities that businesses are involved in the sort of profit-making sector, I would say, okay? And if you aren't interested in the business field, then first and foremost, you need to ask yourself, do you want to be a commercial lawyer? And for those of you who have already ruled that out as an option and are pursuing areas such as family law, personal injury, criminal, etc., commercial awareness is also relevant for you, because you ultimately will become business owners, because the way law firms typically structure themselves is that you start by joining a firm as a trainee or a paralegal, you work many years as an associate, and then the end game for the most ambitious lawyers is, of course, to become a partner. And that means, therefore, understanding and having an appreciation of the fact that law firms exist ultimately to make a profit, even though some of you may be thinking, I want to become a lawyer because you want to help others, okay? So it really is about money makes the world go round, which I know sounds a bit crass, but that's absolutely vital when you're advising clients in certain situations, because if the money doesn't add up, then the parties might just end up walking away, no matter how strong your lawyering skills are. And you need to appreciate that and understand that any legal advice you give factors that in. So let's move on to a bit more detail about what commercial awareness is from my perspective. I think the reason I became quite commercial as a youngster is because I come from quite an entrepreneurial family. My dad owned a couple of Indian restaurants, and right from the day go, I was helping him plan menus. I was, that means doing a bit of research into what competitors were charging for starters and what was, a typical price for a main course, etc. I also helped with advertising. So therefore, I developed that sort of commercial acumen quite early on. Okay. I also did an A-level in economics and government and politics. So for me, I'd already had this initial interest from a young age into areas like current affairs and, and I guess that's how I ended up going back into returning to my roots of wanting to be a journalist, because that's what I wanted to do from the outset before I ended up becoming a lawyer. So for me, number one, commercial awareness is having an interest, a genuine interest in current affairs, and being aware and up to speed of stories concerning the economy. So we know that COVID is obviously a health crisis first, but it's having a massively, significant impact on the economy. And it was actually already, today the economic story relating to COVID was about the UK economy bouncing back from recession. Okay, then we've got Brexit. You've got the US presidential elections. And you may find that, again, being abreast of current affairs is one thing, but then having an opinion and able to talk about it intelligently, I think is really what will stand you head and shoulders above the competition. And one of the great things about paying attention to this bullet point is the fact that it also makes it a lot easier for you to attend networking events, because, these are often things that people are talking about at, it's a awards dinner or, a client entertaining event or a student recruitment event, in your case. Okay. So the next piece is to have, as I said, that sort of appreciation that clients, okay, are, if you work for a commercial law firm, commercial entities, they have, they exist to make a profit. Okay. So it means you need to understand what their objectives are in the context of delivering legal advice. Okay. So a commercial objective, as well as, getting value for money, making a profit, could be to protect their reputation. And that might come up in the context of bringing a claim against a competitor, because the thing about litigation is that it's airing your dirty laundry in public. So that means, therefore, that you are telling the world that you've fallen out with a competitor, and lots of information about your own business will become publicly available. Similarly, another reputation management piece could be in the context of, a market trader in Hackney selling off imitation goods that could damage your brand. Similarly, if the goods they're fobbing off cheaply don't meet the safety requirements that you've set for the products you're producing as a business, then, and that resulted in someone burning their hands or, a firework exploding in their face, that could be pretty serious. So, it's really understanding where the client's coming from before you launch into telling them what the law is, because what they don't want to know is what the law is. What they want to know is how is the law going to impact any future decisions they make about the direction of the business or about steps they might take to resolve an issue that's come up. Okay. And as I said, for those of you who aren't interested in becoming commercial lawyers and want to advise Granny on preparing a will, that then really it becomes more about understanding how law firms are run. Okay. So that means knowing the differences between fixed fees versus chargeable hours and being charged out on an hourly rate or on a daily rate. understanding what leverage means, and that's essentially the split between the number of partners in a team and the number of associates, and what's the magic number when it comes to leverage. And then it might mean understanding a firm's international strategies. That means having an awareness of what's going on in key jurisdictions that a firm is potentially looking to launch a new office in. And I know, for example, that a classic assessment centre question that comes up as part of case studies is, you are a managing partner of a large commercial law firm in London, and you have decided that you want to launch an office in Nigeria. What are the key factors you need to think about before going ahead with this? I will talk you through how you work that out later, but that's one way you could potentially be tested about, to demonstrate your understanding of law firms as businesses. So I've explained what commercial awareness is. Let's talk about what it isn't, okay? And the reason I've included this is because I've seen students do it, and please just don't do it anymore, right? So firstly, it's not about regurgitating lots of jargon because you think that it's going to make you look really impressive, okay? I don't care that you know what, what FTSE stands for, or, what the IMF stands for, okay? I don't need you, that's quite basic level as far as I'm concerned. And what I don't want you to be able to tell me is, well, COVID-19 has caused a recession. We all know that. That's, again, basic BBC News level. What I want to know is what sectors have suffered the most? And if so, what should the government do with regard to helping those sectors recover? Should they rescue businesses in those sectors like they did during the financial crisis? Should they, frankly, just prioritise the economy full stop and do away with future lockdowns so that, businesses have a fighting chance of surviving? Should they prioritise supporting businesses that we know are going to flourish in the post-COVID era? Similarly, we all know that Brexit is going to be difficult because, we are still in the final throes of negotiating some sort of deal with the EU. But what impact is the fact that Joe Biden, who is pro-Remain, going to have on all of this and potential trade relationships with America? So can you see, it's having that level of sophistication that a lot of students haven't quite got there. And I just fully, I don't in any way expect you to have it at the level as I do, because, I'm double your age and I've got, 20 odd years of experience of working in the city. So, but you need to be working towards that, on a really regular basis. And that's why, as I said, it's not something you can achieve by, quickly flicking through the FT or the Economist the night before an interview or an assessment centre. It's worth doing that because, I think that as far as I'm concerned, you should be paying attention to the world around you by following the news on a fairly regular basis. And you should be really au fait with what's going on, what's hot and topical at the moment, okay? This week, it's obviously the Pfizer vaccine being announced and the impact that's had on the stock markets and the share price for Pfizer. It's about again, unemployment rates going up again, so on and so forth. Okay, it's hard really to find stories that don't relate to those key themes, say Brexit, COVID, and the presidential elections. So the final point is, and again, lots of students are guilty of this, which involves simply referring to a deal or case handled by a firm, okay, because it's been showcased on their graduate recruitment website, but they're not having the foggiest about why that deal is significant and why they might have picked that deal to include in the graduate recruitment literature compared to another deal. So is it because, it's simply the, most high profile client that firm has ever advised? Is it a groundbreaking deal because it's, introduced or set precedents that new deals using that structure might involve? Okay, so think about its significance to the firm, but also to the client. And as I said, this is something that will happen gradually over time, which is why, the sooner you start this, the better. Because no one is going to run a webinar for you that's going to make you feel commercially aware at the end of it. This is really more about tools and techniques and things you can be doing for yourself to make you more commercially aware. Okay, so you now know what commercial awareness is. What do law firms do? Or how do law firms test your commercial awareness? Okay, so it's tested throughout the recruitment process, and it starts as early as the application form stage. Okay, so you will find some firms will have quite explicit commercial awareness type questions on the application form. Okay, and it could be as simple as, can you give us an example of a story that you've been following in the news recently and what impact that might have on a firm like ours? Okay, so that is, in a nutshell, a commercial awareness question. Okay, and then if they haven't asked you on the application form, I can bet that they will ask you during the interview, which I'll come on to in the second bullet point. But I just wanted to mention that it will happen also during assessment centres, most likely to be during a group exercise or a presentation that you'll be asked to do, as well as during vacation schemes, because more and more vacation schemes, especially now that they've all moved online, they will again have some sort of exercise that may broadly relate to an assessment centre type scenario, just to help you prep for that for when you do the real deal sort of thing. So questions that firms might ask you that relate to commercial awareness during an interview could be on the following lines. So as I already said, tell us about a recent news story you've been following. Another one could be, what changes do you forecast for the legal sector over the next 5 years or so? Or another one could be, what differentiates us from our competition? So have you seen that all of those relate to, a law firm's strategy, but also thinking really quite closely about how, the clients, what are the clients' needs? What are their priorities? And what do firms need to do to adjust to the new way the client might be thinking? So so it's really worth thinking about that now. And then, as I said, you may be asked to complete a case study that the example I gave you was the launching of a new office, or it could be similar to a exercise I designed for a workshop that Legal Cheek ran on their vacation scheme, which was to do with which businesses which sectors should the government bail out on the back of the damage inflicted on them from the COVID-19 crisis. So it is a combination of them testing your commercial acumen, but also partners are quite curious to know how you process information and how you think. And can you argue points? Because, a lot of lawyering is about processing complex information and then presenting it in a persuasive and user-friendly manner. So how do you bolster your commercial awareness? Really, firstly, you should be reading on a regular basis. If you don't enjoy reading, then listen to and watch relevant content, okay? So I've got a slide at the end as to where this might be. But my most favourite programme is the Today programme on Radio 4, which some of you may not wake up early enough to listen to, but please listen to it on BBC Sounds. They have, I think that they do great interviews with experts, professors, economists, leaders within the city, so on and so forth. And the level that it's pitched at, it's slightly more sophisticated than BBC News, but not so complex that you'll get a headache listening to it. So that would be my recommendation if you were to do one thing and one thing only to bolster your knowledge of current affairs and the link that has to the city and to business. Okay. Now, with regard to understanding firms better, I am doing a presentation later this month on how to research law firms, and I'll touch upon this in a bit more detail. But it's really important to also pay attention to the content that law firms are pumping out. So follow them on relevant social media channels, especially if there are particular firms that you are really interested in applying to. And don't just follow them on their sort of graduate recruitment Instagram page. It's worth following, you know, a particular practice area or a team, because that gives you a lot of clues about which priority, you know, which sectors are a priority for a law firm, whether that's real estate. Because look, if a firm is constantly pouring out details on LinkedIn or on Twitter about cases that they've worked on in, you know, representing Russian oligarchs or, you know, dodgy businessmen, then you know that that's going to be a priority practice area. Similarly, if a firm is talking about the string of private equity deals that it's been involved in and that it's won, you know, millions of awards, being the best private equity advisor in the UK on cross-border deals, then you know that that's going to be a priority for the law firm, because that's the whole point about messaging. You know, it's about, you know, creating your own brand as a business, and it relates to what your values are and what your priorities are for a business. And then, of course, get involved in as many virtual events and webinars as possible. As far as I'm concerned, the best events to get involved in are where firms are talking about their work. Okay, because, you know, most law schools and myself can advise you on how to do a training contract application or what to do during assessment days. But the way you're going to bolster your commercial awareness is actually by watching or listening to presentations about the work that partners are doing. And I know that Legal Cheek have various events coming up where law firms talk about things, you know, about the environment or, you know, about climate change, or they might talk you through, you know, what is private equity or how does a restructuring deal work. That sort of stuff is really useful to listen to. And, you know, they'll pitch it at a level that's going to be appropriate for students rather than qualified lawyers. And then if there are any competitions or quizzes coming up, then again, it's worth entering those, because it's a win-win. Firstly, you can mention the fact that you participated in this quiz or competition in your CV or application form, and then participating will hopefully, again, help you to start thinking more like a commercially savvy lawyer. So commercial awareness isn't just about watching the news or listening to the news and attending events, okay? Your own experiences can also be used to showcase commercial awareness, or your sort of like, you know, how you've developed in this area. And that can be gained through holiday jobs, part-time roles, work placements, hobbies, interests, volunteering, being involved in student law societies, so on. And if it involves, for example, anything to do with selling, budgeting, marketing, all of that's really, really important. And one of the best examples, I think, is actually something that I've nicked from a presentation I listened to on commercial awareness, which is that someone had applied to a firm for a training contract. And throughout their degree, they worked on the checkout at Tesco's. Now, you might be wondering, hang on a minute, how can working as a checkout person at Tesco's be in any way relevant to a career in law? But what this person's research had found was that the firm that they had applied to, Tesco's, was one of their big sort of clients. And what this individual did was, yes, you know, they were typically sat there, you know, at the conveyor belt where, you know, getting people shopping through into their sort of bags. But what the individual did was they went and built on that, saying that, you know, when they weren't working the checkout, they developed a bit more of an interest in how supermarkets work and what the priorities were for Tesco's and how it was sort of position itself against competitors, etc. And their research into Tesco's then showed that Tesco had recently launched, 10 new Tesco Metro stores. and that this firm had advised on that. I mean, that's brilliant. It shows that, you've taken an interest in the particular sector, you've connected it back to the firm that you've applied for, and what a great way to demonstrate commercial awareness and also your knowledge of a firm that you've applied to. Okay. As I said, it's about knowledge gained by staying aware of the world around you. And then really going back to bullet point 2, it's about, for me, when you get asked a commercial awareness style question, what lots of students do is they get a bit sort of stuck on the sort of law points and completely miss what the commercial points were. And you don't need to get all the commercial points raised. Now, let me give you another example of what I mean by that, okay? So let's say that you're a law firm and you advise Adidas, okay, or Adidas, however you pronounce them, the sports brand, okay? And you have been contacted by their in-house sort of head of legal who looks after this sort of IP side of things. And they say that the Nike have launched they've launched a new ad campaign. And what they've done is nicked a couple of slogans that are quite synonymous with Adidas. And the question you might get asked is, do you think Adidas should sue? Okay. And on what grounds? So what a lot of students will do in the first instance is focus on the potential breach of IP. Okay. If there is a breach, okay, it might be that slogan has been registered as an IP asset by Adidas. Okay, so there's obviously clearly a breach of IP there, okay, or copyright. But the commercial reality might be that the phrase isn't that they don't want to be seen in a battle against Nike, because what they don't want to do is be embroiled in that when they want to be seen as, a fair and reasonable brand with great products, etc. Right? And also it's going to be quite expensive because Nike have been historically known as being quite aggressive in the way they, defend claims, etc., etc. And also, but the most important thing is, what's the loss? How are you going to demonstrate to the courts that you've actually, Adidas has made any sort of financial loss by Nike's actions, okay? And is that loss material enough to actually pursue the claim, bearing in mind that it's all going to hit the tabloids, okay? Then let's imagine it's not Nike who's done it. Let's imagine, okay, that Nike has launched a new trainer and your market holder in Hackney has decided to sell fake versions of it. Is it worth Adidas's, time and money to pursue a stallholder who won't actually have the financial means to actually pay any compensation? So in that situation, rather than going all guns blazing and launching a full-blown case against the stallholder, it could be that you just send them a strongly worded letter saying, stop doing it, and send us every, box of trainers you've got so that we can destroy them and don't ever do it again. So you see, it doesn't necessarily mean that, litigation is inevitable, and it's understanding the pros and cons of pursuing it, the amounts of money involved and potential damage to reputation. And all the interviewer is looking for is for you to talk through, that process of how you're filtering, how you're organizing the information that you've sort of put together in your head and how you would present that in a client-friendly manner. So let me break that down into a few more bullet points for you. So how do you demonstrate, or how do you think in it analytically and strategically? So first and foremost, think about the background. okay, and the context. So what's happened? Why has this taken place? What were the causes? Okay. The next piece is, okay, who are the key players and stakeholders? And often what students think of is really the organization as a single entity. But within that organization or within that client, you've got lots of parties, you've got staff, you've obviously got the shareholders, you've got customers, you've got competitors, okay? And you may find that in certain situations that all of those individual groups of stakeholders will have either, you know, they'll either be pro a strategy or they may be against it. So that's worth thinking about. And then the next question to ask yourself is, what are the implications of a situation and what steps can be taken to turn it around? Okay. So as I highlighted in the Adidas versus Nike case, you know, is there potential loss in revenue? Is there potential reputational damage? And I think that's the reputational damage piece is something that's often forgotten by students because they focus quite, you know, heavily on the loss in revenue or the loss in profits. Okay. And then let's think about another scenario, not necessarily to do with litigation, but a business that likes living on the edge. Okay. There's a household brand, which I'm sure you've all used during lockdown to buy goods from. You know, they've got a reputation for being pretty aggressive. Okay. And they do live on the edge. But what they don't want their lawyers to say is, no, you can't do that. You're breaking the law. No, you can't do that because you will get fined. Right? What they want the lawyer to say to them is, well, if you do go down this route, you will get fined, but the fine is pretty negligible versus how much your business will benefit from a jump in revenue. And it will be, frankly, a slap on the wrist. So it's your call. But they might say the fine might be, you know, insignificant, but this will make it on the front page of the FT. And it may mean that your shareholders walk away from you. So that's where the fine and the reputation thing go hand in glove. But an alternative way to answer the question could be, you could take this step, you'll get fined, your reputation will be in tatters. But what I suggest is that we work around it. And this is an alternative way of achieving your goal. But that's more ethical, that's 100% legal, and actually it will be a bit quicker. Can you see? So that's the difference between telling the client what the law is, telling them they can't do something, versus this is the law, this is why you can't do it, but this is how you could get around it. Now, a useful technique when doing these group exercises, probably more so during group exercises or if it's an application form question, is the SWOT analysis method. Okay. Now, this is something that any business studies students will probably be familiar with because it's really commonly used. If you Google it, you'll see lots of examples. And I certainly urge you to do a bit more reading around this subject. So SWOT it's essentially a widely recognized tool that organizations, whether that's charitable or profit making, use to determine whether they should do something. Okay. And the best example in terms of law firm recruitment processes is that classic opening a new office in a jurisdiction that's potentially high risk. Okay. So what you're going to do as part of your SWOT analysis is look at 4 areas: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Okay. So strengths could be that, you've already earmarked a, team that you could remove, relocate from London to Nigeria, to Lagos. And they've already got, an in with, some really significant clients that are on the ground in Lagos. Then but the weakness could be that you haven't actually ever done any work on the ground in Lagos. And another weakness could be that the process of launching a new office in Nigeria is hugely complex because it's quite a protectionist market. By the way, I don't know whether this is the case. I'm just using it as an example. And they don't like foreign law firms coming in because they want to, make sure that the work is preserved for local law firms. The opportunity could be that the reason you want to do this is because the Nigerian economy is booming and it's the next big economy, and you need to get in quickly to make sure that those clients who are going to be doing lots of outward investment into Europe, that you get a slice of the action and you get in early ahead of the competition. And then the threats could be that Nigeria is a politically unstable country. There's an election coming up, and all the good work that's happened may be undone if the uber right-wing candidate gets in, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, as I said, I don't know whether any of this is, accurate when talking about Lagos and Nigeria, but that's how you actually work your way around this SWOT analysis. And often it's done literally on a piece of blank paper, and you do a bit of a brainstorming session. And that's how I would potentially, if this were part of a group exercise, I would recommend that, you would suggest that to your colleagues in the group exercise. Okay. As I've said, it's used often during case studies. But if you think SWOT when asked these scenario type questions as well, then I think you'd be in a pretty good place. Okay. So we've talked about the relationship and the importance of commercial awareness when it comes to clients. Let's move on to law firms. As I said, they're businesses too, okay? They're not law centers. They exist to make a profit, okay? So when you're researching firms and trying to determine whether they'd be a good match for what you're interested in doing, your values and practice areas that you perhaps, enjoyed during your LPC and student years, think about key clients, sectors, and geographic reach. And they can evolve over time. And as I said, the clues are in the press releases, in the social media posts, etc. Okay. It's also worth thinking about, their competitors, as a potential threat, and then other external factors such as COVID, Brexit, and then the demise of certain sectors. I think we've all become, very familiar with the fact that there are certain sectors that are really suffering during the COVID crisis, and some are just going to become redundant. And even when I look at, my life on this planet, there are certain jobs and sectors that just don't exist anymore, and that will continue to happen. But similarly, though, there will be new ones that are entering. So green businesses is, again, something the government's shouting a lot about because of climate change. Okay. And then, again, things for you to go away and read about in your own time are areas such as AI and automation, globalization and alternative structures. So alternative structures, as I've said, a law firm is typically a partnership, which means that those partners share the profit between them once all the outgoings have been paid for. But some firms are now, they have become LLPs, or some have even listed on the stock exchange. So there are changes in structures, and it's worth your while understanding why a law firm might want to list on the stock exchange rather than stick to a traditional partnership model. And if you're applying to a firm who's done that and you talked about that in your application form, I think you've done pretty well. Okay. Other topics are diversity and inclusivity, and then alternative ways of working, which has come up again and again and again and again. Okay. Which is, flexible working, consultant lawyers, and these virtual law firms. Then you've got, whether firms will ever go back to working in offices full time. And again, it's really up to you to have an opinion on this. It can be a negative opinion, it can be a positive opinion, but it's also seeing both sides of the argument and being able to debate that, with partners during an interview. Some of the topics that we've talked about, or I've talked about, COVID, Brexit, are huge, okay? So rather than talking broadly about those, if you are going to mention them, which, because the danger is that everyone is going to be talking about COVID and Brexit on application forms, first of all, ask yourself, is there something more original you can come up with in application forms? And it could be, a key deal that the firm's involved in. Or if you are going to mention COVID or Brexit, link it to something that is a commercial priority for a law firm. So, for example, if your research has proven that a law firm really, its main sort of asset in London is doing private equity deals, then what you could do is look for literature that talks about private equity and the impact that a potential downturn, will have on how private equity deals, operate in a recession. So that's how you bring COVID right back down and making it really quite relevant to that particular firm. So in terms of further resources, I'm finishing early because I want to sort of take questions from the audience. Newspapers are worth having a look at. I know that a lot of them are now behind paywalls, so see which ones you can access for free. Do for sure use your employer, your any sort of like corporate subscriptions that your law schools, or if you're working as a paralegal, for example, that you can access through that, so that you don't have to pay for subscriptions. The Guardian online is available for free anyway. I've deliberately left The Economist off there because I find the articles in The Economist quite long, and I prefer learning through listening and watching things, which is why it's worth your while seeing whether you can identify certain podcasts. And they don't need to be ones that are pulled together by, anyone famous. It can be stuff that law firms are producing, because in this new world of social media, there's been a hell of a lot of content that law firms are producing. And then a few books that I found quite helpful are the All You Need to Know About Commercial Awareness and All You Need to Know About the City by Christopher Stokes. The Future of Legal Services will fill you in on everything about automation and whether the robots are going to take over the work of junior lawyers and trainees, and what that means in terms of the way, I mentioned the word leverage. So what is that going to mean in terms of the way law firms are going to structure themselves? How many junior lawyers do they need per deal or per case? Okay. Now, the other one, I read this way back in the day, is The Money Machine and How the City Works. I don't know about you, even though I did A-level economics, the city was still a little bit of a mystery to me. And I didn't fully appreciate what the different organizations were, whether that's the investment banks, and then within investment banks, what are the different functions within investment banks? What is private equity? I didn't have a clue because private equity didn't exist. What's the difference between a private equity fund and an asset manager? So it's worth reading around the buzzwords, so that when you are reading newspaper articles or listening to podcasts, that you actually understand that. And if you don't, then, hopefully some of you already have mentors. Then tap into your mentors and get them to help you understand and get your head around it. But I promise you, there are lots of phrases that you won't get until you actually start practicing law. And don't be afraid to ask questions because you think that you might look silly or it's too easy and simple. It's worth asking, because one thing I do know is that lawyers love talking about the work they do, okay? And then, law firm websites, as I said, don't just focus on their graduate recruitment pages. Look on their press releases page or recent news, and you'll see what deals they've put out. Look at their social media posts. And going back to chatting to others, if any of you do have friends who are studying business studies or economics, then I would really talk to them. it really is worth your while, because they just have a different take on the world of commerce and business to what you're going to be familiar with. And, and that's certainly helpful for those of you who haven't done an A-level in those subjects, because I had a bit of an advantage because, as I said, I did A-level economics and therefore had a good handle on some of the jargon already. So when I was reading relevant content, it didn't come across as being a bit above my head or a bit overwhelming. And as I said, steady is really the order of the day. Devote time on it regularly, every week, and you'll just become better at it, and ask lots of questions. So that's all I was going to say as the main part of my presentation. There is a Q&A function, so feel free to fire questions at me, because I don't want to sort of missell what this session was about, because as I said, I'm not going to be able to spend enough time with any of you collectively or individually to teach you everything about private equity or to talk you through how a law firm will decide whether their client should, litigate against a competitor. That's something that, you can do in your own time slowly. But if there are any phrases I've used this afternoon that don't make sense, then please ping questions at me now. Right, here you go. Here's one. Thank you. So you mentioned about the researching law webinar. Could you give us a bit more information on that? Oh, you mean researching law firms? Is that what you meant, Laura? I think that's what you meant. So look, let's assume that that is what you meant. The reason I talked about researching law firms is because one of the single biggest reasons why students, I think, don't get invitations to interviews and they can't convert their application forms into interviews is because they're targeting the wrong firms, okay? And the reason they're targeting the wrong firms is because they've not researched the firms on their shortlist properly, okay? Now, and what a lot of trainees also do is focus on things like the size of the trainee intake or the number of offices. But for me, it's digging a little bit deeper and looking to see, what are the priority practice areas? How do you identify what they are? And how do you then interpret that so that you can relay that on an application form? So that's what this new webinar is going to be about. It's really about, okay, firms are pumping lots of information out into the market and it can be a bit overwhelming. You don't know what to read, what to make of it. Some of it can be a bit, I don't know about you, but I was talking to a few students recently and they said that they've attended so many events over the summer and it got to the point where it sounded as though everyone was saying the same things. So what should you be listening out for? What are the clues so that you can actually then pull together a case file for each of the firms that you're going to be applying for? So that's what that presentation is really about, making sense of it all rather than, just listening to what firms want you to hear, which is we're amazing and we've got, tier 1 rankings in every practice area, because it's very on message. It's, so what I want you to do is that warts and all research into law firms, because then you'll find firms that are a better match for you. Right. Thank you for that, Laura. So the next question is, do you think regional firms differ in their approach to commercial awareness? Yes, they will do. All firms will differ in their approach to commercial awareness, depending on who they are and what they do and who their clients are, okay? So a law firm doing legal aid work, in crime and family work, is not going to be asking you questions about FTSE 100 clients. It's as simple as that, okay? But what they might do is get you to talk about, the way they price work, and whether, do you think law firms should be charged out at a daily rate, or in this scenario, would you offer a fixed fee, and what would be more appropriate? Okay, so let me explain this to you so that you go away with a bit more knowledge. So a fixed fee is hugely beneficial for a client because there are no hidden nasties. They know it's, what the price they've been quoted is the price they're going to pay. Okay. Now, as the law firm, the risk of going down that route is that you may find that you've underestimated how much work is going to be involved in giving the client a good quality piece of advice. So you might need to allow a bit of wriggle room to allow for the fact that the work might take longer. And then, so it's quite hard sometimes for law firms to decide how to, set the fee, because often there are lots of unknown quantities involved in the way a case might unfold. So that's why in contentious work, firms are more reticent about fixed rates, whereas in a non-contentious piece of work, so that's, advising on something quite discreet, which involves, just you and your client. So, for example, buying a house, most firms will just set a fixed fee for that because it's quite repetitive. The workflow is quite predictable as to what's going to be involved. So it means that you can be a bit more competitive when billing clients. So let's go for the next one. Okay, so hi Husnara, thank you so much for today's commercial awareness talk. I want to ask how detailed our knowledge has to be about commercial awareness. Do we research and read around a few sectors, topics and areas, or should we have a broader understanding? Thank you. It's a combination of both, Sophie. So, from my perspective, you need to have that sort of broad brush understanding of how a law firm fits within the city more broadly, or if it's a regional firm, within the commercial space within that city, whether that's Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Bristol, etc. Okay, and how therefore who are its target clients. Okay, and then everything else is matching it to that. So if it's a firm that only does litigation in one particular area, then having a solid understanding of maybe a couple of their recent cases would be pretty good. If it's a full service law firm, which in essence basically means they have lawyers specializing in everything from, corporate and commercial through to litigation, real estate, employment, etc. So that's when firms say they're full service, that's essentially what they mean. They don't, when they say they're niche, it will be that they only do one or two areas of law. So a niche firm might say that we only do employment work, but we only represent the employer rather than the employee. Okay. So for a niche firm, your understanding can be a lot narrower, but it's got to be really aligned to the areas that that niche firm specializes in. If it's a firm that's, full service but on its website talks about two sectors that it does a lot of work in, then of course having a slightly deeper understanding of those sectors would be extremely helpful. So, and the way you'll know whether they have, a practice area that's more prominent to that firm than others is, and again, I'll touch upon this in my next webinar, is when you're researching firms, it's worth your while looking to see what percentage of a law firm's revenue is derived from litigation, or derived from employment work, or derived from private equity. Then you know that that's a priority. Because, if a law firm says that 70% of its revenues is derived from advising on advising high net worth individuals on tax planning, then that, that for that firm, tax is quite a big deal. Okay, so the next question I've got is from Leah. Let's have a read of that one. Hello, Husnara. Thank you very much for this talk. Super insightful. How do you think we should show commercial awareness in applications that do not specifically ask a commercial awareness question? Brilliant question. Well done, dear, for asking that. So the way that would work is in the motivation question, why do you want to join our firm? That would be an obvious way to show off a bit of commercial awareness, because it could be that you want to join this firm because they've got, you know, a really strong reputation in top-end employment work, and you've been, you know, this is an area that you've been really interested in because you've been following all the stories about how businesses are having to furlough staff during the COVID crisis, and you're particularly fascinated by the impact that has on, you know, some of the sort of ethical and moral questions that raises about how you decide who should be furloughed, and whether you should bring them back or whether they should be made redundant, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so what you've done then is linked your interests with a focus for that firm with something current that's going on in the news. That's how you would do it. And that works every single time. And then you could also talk about it in your hobbies and interests. So they might ask you a question with regard to, you know, an achievement. So what has been your biggest achievement to date? And that would be a brilliant way to demonstrate commercial awareness, because you could talk about being the treasurer for the Law Society and that you were responsible for, you know, pricing the law ball, and you had, you know, you were concerned that because the ball had to become an online affair, your costs for running it were lower, but it involved, you were worried that fewer people would turn up because it's an online event and doesn't have the same draw as something that takes place in a stately home or something. So, you know, therefore you needed to do some serious number crunching to ensure the event was profitable, or at least broke even. And so it's really about talking about how that worked. I think we've got about 30 seconds left before the webinar runs out of time. So I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you very, very much for listening in. Do keep an eye out on the Barbary website for announcements about the SQE, because this really is a bit of a big bang in the context of legal education. And if you haven't already signed up for my next webinar, please do so. And keep an eye on Cheeky Little Careers as well, because that is frankly another way of being commercially astute, so to speak. Brilliant. Thank you very much.